Hello, my name is Jim Minnick, and I am a member of the evangelization team here at Our Lady of Perpetual Help in Morton, Pennsylvania. And on behalf of our pastor, Father James Gerner, and our parochial vicar, Father Kwan, I'd like to welcome those of you who are joining us for the first time tonight, and welcome back those of you who were with us last night. Tonight is the second night that we'll be sharing with our special guest speaker, Roy Schoeman. Now, for those of us who were here last night, we really got a good picture, I guess, or a good understanding of who Roy is and his amazing story, what God has done in his life. But for those of you who weren't able to join us or would like to know more about Roy, the best way to find out about him is to go to his website, which is www.salvationisfromthejews.com. Roy also has a YouTube channel by the same name, Salvation is from the Jews. And Roy also has two best-selling books by Ignatius Press, the one being Salvation is from the Jews, the role of Judaism in salvation history, and Honey from the Rock, 16 Jews find the sweetness of Christ. Roy also has a weekly radio show on Radio Maria and does many other things. So as I said last night, we had an opportunity to hear just how God has taken on Roy, or led Roy through an incredible journey from growing up in a very Jewish environment to up through when he attended university, which by all accounts, he was an atheist at that point, to this amazing sovereign encounter with the Lord, followed by another supernatural experience with Mary, the Blessed Mother. You have to hear the talk. Roy shared this story himself, and we hoped for those of you who were with us last night, you will be getting a recording of that talk. And for those of you who weren't, we hope to have it up on our website, our parish website, in the coming week. That last night's and tonight's talk, and that website is www.olphmorton.org. So tonight, I believe Roy's going to be giving us, I'd say, probably a broader appreciation for the events that we'll be celebrating and commemorating this week. Roy's going to be looking at the Last Supper and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And I'm going to look at my cheat sheet here because I'm just going to give a little idea of what I think Roy's going to be talking about tonight. These are some of the questions that I heard him pose last night when he was talking about tonight's presentation. Why was the Last Supper chosen by God to occur on the eve of Passover? Was it an accident that Jesus was crucified on the following day, which was Passover? Was it all coincidental, or was it part of God's perfect plan for salvation? And also the point that ushered in the transformation of Judaism into Catholicism. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand it over to Roy in just a minute. I do want to mention, and I actually see there's already a couple questions coming in, but on your screen you should have a Q&A button, and like we did last night, if there's questions that come up during Roy's presentation, please open that Q&A and type in your question and send it as soon as you can. We will leave time at the end for Roy to answer those questions. We did it last night. They were a great part of us getting, I think, a deeper understanding of all the things that he had shared. So the Q&As are a huge part of the presentation, and Roy will be setting aside time for that. So with that, I think, Roy, I'm going to hand this over to you. There you are. All right.
Okay.
It's all yours.
Okay, and If you didn't hear me, I'm sure you would have said something by now. So it sounds like everything's working.
Right.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you guys all for coming or for sitting in your office or whatever in your den and watching this. And last night was a lot of fun. Last night I gave my witness testimony, so I will not be doing that again. But the heart of my witness testimony is that I grew up Jewish. And not only did I grow up Jewish, but I consider myself still Jewish. I consider myself a Jew in the Catholic Church because I never stopped being Jewish. Judaism was transformed into the Catholic Church when the Jewish Messiah came, who is more popularly known as Jesus Christ. And he transformed Judaism, which was always intended simply to be a preparation phase to prepare for the coming of the Messiah. He transformed Judaism into the Catholic Church and her sacraments, which was always the intention of the system of salvation designed by God for all of humanity. And in fact, sacramental Judaism was transformed into the sacraments of the Catholic Church, one can say, at the Last Supper, because the Last Supper was at one and the same time a ritual Passover Seder, a sacramental Passover Seder, in fact, and the first Catholic Mass. It's hardly a coincidence. And in looking at the transformation of Judaism into the Catholic Church at the Last Supper, one sees the overarching interlocked plan of God for salvation history from the Garden of Eden until the second coming, and how I have to be careful, how the first part of that was Judaism to prepare for the coming of the Messiah, and the second part of that was to spread the fruits of the incarnation, life, suffering, and death of the Messiah to all of mankind through the Catholic Church and her sacraments. And the pivot point was the Last Supper. That is all by way of a little bit of a foundation. Now, to understand why this makes perfect sense and why Jesus had to be crucified on the Passover and why the first Catholic Mass had to, so to speak, be a Passover Seder, we have to, I guess, go back in time a little bit and look at a little bit of what the Passover Seder was all about and what Judaism was all about, so to speak, and backfill a little bit. Because once we understand what the Passover Seder really is, spiritually within Judaism and within God's plan for salvation, it'll be much easier to understand why it was used as the pivot point. So with that, let me just say, just because, of course, you're all coming from different backgrounds and different levels of sophistication of knowledge of the scriptures and so forth, my saying that Holy Week was the week preceding Passover is not controversial and is not Judaizing, but it's in all four of the Gospels. And I'll just read the passage from Luke chapter 22 to set the stage a little bit. This is actually, you'll see, this is all about Holy Week. Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to put Jesus to death, for they feared the people. Then Satan entered into Judas Iscariot, who was of the number of the 12. He went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers how he might betray Jesus to them. They were glad and engaged to give him money. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover Lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it." They said to him, "Where will you have us prepare it?" And they went and found it as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. And when the hour came, Jesus sat at table, and the apostles with him, and he said to them, "I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I shall not eat it again until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he said, "Take this and divide it among yourselves. For I tell you that from now on I shall not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." And he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And likewise the cup after supper, saying, "This cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." Now, I'm sure that those last few lines will be familiar to any of us who are Catholic and regularly go to Mass. Those are, of course, the words of consecration in the Mass, the words of, I don't want to say the words of transubstantiation, but the centerpiece of when the priest confects the Eucharist, turns the wafer and the wine into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus, are those very words. Those very words, which I just read from Luke 22, were words that Jesus said at the Last Supper. And as that passage I read made clear, that was the Passover meal. That was the beginning of Passover. So I just want to justify myself. I'm not making this up. This is absolutely inescapable that the week that when Jesus went up to Jerusalem in order to by Jewish law, all Jews who were able to were required to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year. One of those festivals, one of those feasts was Passover. They had to offer a Passover sacrifice, a lamb that was ritually slaughtered in the temple, and then they had to eat the Passover meal, which is usually nowadays called the Seder. The centerpiece of that meal being the Passover lamb, which had just been sacrificed. Jesus went up to Jerusalem for Holy Week. He didn't know it was Holy Week yet. He just knew it was Passover. He went up for the Passover festival, as he was supposed to do. The events of Holy Week all took place in the 6 days actually preceding Passover. So what is Passover all about? I wish I could see your faces because I could then tell if I'm making sense or not. But anyway, I'll just have to assume I'm making sense. What is Passover all about? Passover is the commemoration of the exodus of the Jews from Egypt. The exodus from the Jews from Egypt, I think most of us know that story, at least in the outlines, from Charlton Heston or whatever. But the Jews were slaves of the Pharaoh in Egypt for 400 odd years. And they were miraculously released from slavery in Egypt through the agency of Moses. And I will be talking about that story a little bit more in a few minutes because it has a lot to do with why Passover had to be when the Messiah did his ultimate act of redemption. But I think I lost my train of thought, so I might as well just go back there. Oh, so Passover is the anniversary of the exodus of the Jews from Egypt. The Jews were released by the Pharaoh in one very momentous night when he allowed the Jews to leave. And that was, in fact, Passover night. That was the night of the 14th of Nisan, which happened, in fact, day before yesterday. And every 14th of Nisan from the time of the Exodus until today, Jews are required to celebrate the Passover and celebrate the Passover meal. And when there was a temple, also, of course, offer the Passover sacrifice. Now, Passover and the celebration of the Passover is so central within Judaism that it says in the Old Testament that if a Jew fails to celebrate the Passover, he is cut off from the Jewish people and loses his redemption. Why is the celebration of the Passover so central in Judaism? It's in large part because the freeing from slavery in Egypt of the Jews within Judaism was always understood to be the prefigurement of the coming of the Messiah. I'll justify that later in this talk. That the Moses was the first redeemer. It uses that term actually in the Talmud, in the Jewish tradition. Moses was the first redeemer. The Messiah is going to be the second redeemer. All of Judaism is about the anticipation of the coming of the Messiah. And since the first Messiah, the first redeemer, came on Passover, the first redemption happened on Passover. When the Messiah comes to bring about the final redemption, it's going to have to come on Passover. And since Judaism is all about the coming of the Messiah, it is in fact the Passover celebration that is the heart of the Jewish liturgical anticipation of the coming of the Messiah, which is why it's so central. I'm going to have to back up. Throughout this talk, I'm going to have to be shuttling back and forth in time and back and forth across Judaism and Christianity. I'll get to more Christianity and Catholicism in a little while. But okay, let me shuttle back in time to about, I don't have it in front of me, 1500, not 1500 years, 1,000 years before Christ or so, when the Jews were slaves of the Pharaoh in Egypt, okay? I'll tell that story. I guarantee I'll give you your money back if it doesn't all make sense by the end, that if I don't succeed in weaving everything together by the end. Okay, the Jews were the entire Jewish nation, all the Jewish people were slaves of the Pharaoh in Egypt for 400 plus years. God raised up a deliverer for the Jewish people, Moses, and he told Moses to go to Pharaoh and get Pharaoh to allow the Jews to leave. Well, Pharaoh wasn't having any of it. So God would tell Moses to perform one miracle, a plague, kind of like a blackmail or a threat, but perform this miracle for the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh would get scared and allow the Jews to leave. But then he would change his mind, and before they left, he would renege on the promise to let them leave. And through Moses, God performed 9 of these plagues. One of the plagues was turning the Nile River into blood. One of the plagues was jamming a huge cargo ship in the Suez Canal. Oops, nope, no, I'm moving too far forward in time. Forget that. One of the plagues was a plague of frogs, and so forth and so on. But each time the Pharaoh reneged. And then finally, God, through Moses, sent the 10th and final plague, which is the slaying of all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. And after that, Pharaoh just, really took this seriously and allowed the Jews to leave. Now, when the angel of death was going to be sent to throughout the land of Egypt to kill all of the firstborn of man and beast, the Jews were to mark their houses so that the angel of death would pass over their house and wouldn't kill the firstborn in that house. The way they would do that is they had to sacrifice a spring lamb without blemish, and dip hyssop in the lamb's blood, and daub the blood on the lintel and doorpost of the house. And that would be the sign that told the angel of death to pass over that house and not kill the firstborn, because that house belonged to the Jews. That's why it's called Passover, because the angel of death would pass over their houses. After this miracle took place, the Pharaoh allowed the Jews to leave, but as soon as they had left, he changed his mind and he sent his army after them. I'm going to race through the skeleton of the events of the Exodus, and then I'm going to go back to the 10th plague, and you'll see how intensely Christological all of this is. So anyway, he allowed the Jews to leave, but he sent the army after them to bring them back. They were trapped at the shores of the Red Sea. They couldn't cross. The Egyptian army was about to come upon them when, through Moses, God performed another miracle of parting the waters of the Red Sea. The Jews crossed through the waters of the Red Sea, dry shod, and went to the other side. And then as soon as the last Jew crossed over, the waters were released and flowed back and drowned the Egyptian army. So at that point, the Jews were free from the Egyptian army. However, they were in the desert for a long time, 40 years, in fact. And God performed a number of other miracles to sustain them in the desert. But key one was when they had no food to eat in the desert, he arranged manna from heaven to fall down, this miraculous bread from heaven that would fall down, would appear every morning when they woke up, and they could make bread out of it. And that's what sustained them for the 40 years in the desert. They wandered through the desert for those 40 years and finally made it to the promised land, to Israel. Now, in Judaism, as I mentioned earlier, this being freed from slavery in Egypt through the agency of Moses was seen as a picture in advance of the coming of the Messiah, which would be the ultimate redemption through the agency of the Messiah. In Christianity, the exodus from Egypt from the days of the very first church fathers, because remember, the very first church fathers were by and large Jews, or they were very, very close to being Jews, because all of the apostles were Jews, and all of the first wave of Christians were Jews. And so like Saint Jerome, he wasn't a Jew, but he lived in Israel, and he was still eating and living and breathing the Old Testament and so forth. Anyway, so the story of the Exodus from Egypt from the very earliest days of Christianity was always seen as intensely Christological. I'll go through that. First of all, the slaying of the firstborn in itself already gets a little bit suspicious with respect to Jesus. And I'm not going to elaborate on that because that's a little bit vague, not exactly vague, but it's a little bit abstract. But of course, Jesus was God's only son, and God sacrificed him for us, actually. And so whenever the firstborn is being sacrificed, there's a little echo, to say the least, of that. If I had more time, I could go into Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, which really makes that linkage much tighter. Okay, but moving aside from that, moving along, the daubing the blood of the Passover lamb on the lintel and doorposts of the houses, remember, that's what got the angel of death to pass by and not kill the firstborn. That has got to look like the blood on the cross. Because if you think of the houses in Egypt in those days, they would have been adobe, they would have been clay, but the lintel and the doorposts were wood. And what caused the angel of death to pass over and not kill the firstborn in the house was the blood on essentially the wooden cross in the doorway of the lintel and the doorposts. And what blood was that? That was the blood of the Passover lamb without spot or blemish. And we know how many times in the New Testament Jesus is referred to as the Passover lamb without spot or blemish. In fact, the reason why it says in John that the Roman soldiers didn't break the legs of Jesus was because the scripture about the Passover lamb says the Passover lamb has to be sacrificed without a bone of it being broken. And St. John even cites that Old Testament requirement when he explains why the soldiers didn't break the legs of Jesus when they broke the legs of the other two thieves on the cross. Now, the Jews' freedom from the power of Pharaoh in Egypt was understood by the church fathers as being a picture. The Jews' slavery to the Pharaoh in Egypt was a picture of the Christians', actually all of mankind's, slavery to the power of Satan. And the Pharaoh was understood to be a picture of Satan. The Jews were freed from the power of Pharaoh by crossing through the waters of the Red Sea. That was understood to be a picture of the Christian being freed from the power of Satan by passing through the waters of baptism. The Jews then wandered through the desert for 40 years on the way to the promised land. That's a picture of the Christian wandering through the 40 or 80 years of the desert of this life on the way to the true promised land, which of course is heaven. And the Jews needed something to sustain them during their wandering through the desert. And what was that? That was the miraculous bread from heaven, manna, which was, of course, a perfect picture of the true miraculous bread from heaven, the Eucharist, right? That sustains the Christian in their wandering through the desert of this life to the true promised land, which, of course, isn't the earthly Jerusalem, it's a heavenly Jerusalem. And this equation between the manna in the wilderness and the Eucharist was made by none other than Jesus. So let me read that passage from John 6. It's the famous Bread of Life discourse. I'm just trying to skip some verses in the interest of time. So the Jews are giving Jesus a hard time, as they often did, at least the Jewish authorities, the Pharisees and the scribes and so forth. So I'm picking up John 6 around verse 30. So they said to him, then what sign do you do that we may see and believe you? What work do you perform? Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus then said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven. My Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. They said to him, Lord, give us this bread always. Jesus replied, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall not hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. The Jews then murmured at him because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. They said, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose mother and father we know? How does he now say, I have come down from heaven? Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, he who believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread which comes down from heaven, that a man may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread which I shall give for the life of the world is my flesh. The Jews then disputed among themselves, saying, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? So Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. He who eats me will live because of me. This is the bread which came down from heaven, not such as the fathers ate and died. He who eats this bread will live forever. Excuse me one moment. Okay. So you see, the Jews are giving Jesus a hard time. They're saying, look, why should we believe in you? Moses performed miracles. He brought down the bread from heaven. What miracle will you perform? And Jesus immediately says, I am the true miraculous bread from heaven. And your forefathers in the wilderness ate the miraculous bread from heaven, but they died anyway. Who eats this miraculous bread will live forever, and my flesh is this miraculous bread. So you see that in this discourse of Jesus, he is saying, first of all, he's saying, if Moses was a figure, then I am the fulfillment of that figure. You know, I'm sort of like the ultimate Moses, which is what the Jews always knew that the Messiah was going to be, because in Jewish theology, Moses was a precursor of the Messiah. He was the first Redeemer, and the Messiah was the final Redeemer. And he's also saying, he is saying that the Eucharist is the true miraculous bread from heaven. So let me get back to the Last Supper. Let me see. Okay. So the Last Supper was a Passover Seder. The Passover Seder is the ritual commemoration of the Exodus from Egypt. It's all a tremendous thanksgiving to God for the Exodus from Egypt, but it's also an entire prayer from beginning to end to send the Messiah. Because as I mentioned before, Jewish theology has always taught that when the Messiah comes, he has to come on Passover, since the Exodus from Egypt was a prefigurement of when the Messiah comes. And since Moses was a prefigurement of the Messiah, then when the real thing happens, it has to be at Passover. If you ever go to a Passover Seder, now, the Christological content of the Passover Seder is not stressed in Judaism, to say the least, overtly, of course, because, of course, Judaism does not think that Jesus was the Messiah. But it absolutely permeates the Passover Seder. So, for instance, if you ever go to a Passover Seder, there is a place setting for Elijah the prophet, and there is a cup that's called Elijah's cup that has wine in it, ready for the appearance of Elijah the prophet. And the children all run to the door near the end of the Seder, and they throw open the door to see if Elijah the prophet is there. And if he's there, they invite him in to share the Passover meal at the table. That's why his place setting is there. What's that got to do with anything? Well, the Jews know that before the Messiah comes, Elijah the prophet has to return. That is from a passage in Malachi 4. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of children to their fathers. Now, that reference to Elijah having to return before the Messiah comes was made numerous times in the Gospels with a reference to John the Baptist having come in the spirit and power of Elijah. For instance, when the angel Gabriel announced to Zechariah that Elizabeth was going to bear a son, the angel said to him, quote, "He will go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children." That's a direct reference to Malachi 4. And then Jesus said in Matthew 11, quote, "Truly I say to you, among those born of women, there has risen no one greater than John the Baptist. If you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come." So the reason the Passover Seder has a place setting for Elijah is when the Messiah comes, he has to come on Passover. If this is the Passover when the Messiah comes, then Elijah is going to have to come first, because we know that Elijah is going to come to announce the coming of the Messiah. And if Elijah comes this Passover, we want to be ready for him. So that's why there's the place setting. Every Passover Seder ends with a shout, "Next year in Jerusalem." They're not referring to making a pilgrimage to Israel. They're referring to the fact, the understanding in Jewish theology, that when the Messiah comes, all of the Jews will be miraculously reunited in Jerusalem. And so they're saying at the end of that Seder, well, we've completed this Passover Seder. The Messiah has not come. So let us fervently pray and hope that he comes next Passover. Therefore, next year in Jerusalem, meaning if he comes at the next Seder, then we'll all be in Jerusalem. Now, I'm trying to think, I'm trying to weave this all together. So, okay. So where do I go from here? Let me talk a little bit more about the Passover Seder, okay, and the Passover Lamb. Every Passover Seder, which includes, by the way, the Last Supper, which is a Passover Seder, but every Passover Seder for 1,500 years before the Last Supper, the lamb was sacrificed in the temple, and then it was brought home, and it was roasted, and it was presented as the centerpiece of the Seder table, of the Passover table. And the way it was presented is described in both Jewish sources and Catholic sources. The Talmud describes how the roasted Passover lamb is to be presented on the Passover table. And it says the following: thin, smooth staves of wood are thrust through the shoulders of the lamb in order to hang it and skin it. And then a skewer of pomegranate wood is thrust through the Passover lamb from its mouth to its buttocks. Okay, so one skewer stretches out the forelegs of the Passover lamb, and another skewer goes from the back of its head down to its legs. And if that wasn't clear enough, St. Justin Martyr in the 2nd century writes the following: for the lamb which is roasted and dressed up in the form of a cross. For one spit is transfixed right through from the lower parts up to the head, and one across the back, to which are attached the legs of the lamb. So that lamb, that roasted lamb on the Passover table, is essentially stretched out on a crucifix. One stake from the back of its head through to its legs, and another across its shoulders. One can imagine Jesus growing up with Joseph and Mary. Every Passover, they're sitting around the Passover table, and there is one image in the middle of that Passover table, and it is essentially the crucified Passover lamb. And of course, at least Jesus and Mary know what that's a picture of. So, okay, so I think I've actually done it already. I think I've already made clear why. I mean, the Catholic Church is the transformation of Judaism into its fulfilled form. It's not like when Jesus came as the Jewish Messiah and transformed Judaism into the Catholic Church and its sacraments. He blew off Judaism and Jewish theology and Jewish sacramental life and so forth, because that was all given by God, which means it was given by him. It's all, it's the same. Let me think of, it's one plan for the salvation of all of mankind that began with Abraham, you could say, and extends until the second coming. And that plan involved preparing the Jewish people to enable the Son of God to incarnate, giving the Jewish people enough divine revelation so they would know, first of all, the one true God. They would know about the creation of man. They would know about the fall of man, the need for redemption, the future coming of a Redeemer, and so forth. And they would have to be sufficiently prepared so that when this happened, they could spread the gospel throughout the world. So the Jewish people, the whole story of the Jews was simply to be the first phase of the unfolding of salvation. That first phase culminating in the incarnation of the second person of the Most Holy Trinity. And then after that happened, the fruits of that incarnation, life, passion, and death could be spread throughout the world through Christianity, and in particular through the Catholic Church and her sacraments. So it's really one religion divided into two phases: a preparation phase and a fulfillment phase. Obviously, the fulfillment phase does not ignore the preparation phase. It transforms it, it builds on it. So if Judaism always understood that the Messiah is going to come on Passover, the Messiah came on Passover. The Messiah came on Passover because our redemption through the Messiah, the key event of our redemption through the Messiah, took place on the cross on 3:00 on Friday afternoon, right, of Good Friday, which was Passover. Now, I don't know if this is going to come up in the questions. There's a little complexity about why about whether Passover began. It's not really a confusion, it's a complexity. It is true that Passover only began at sunset of Good Friday. And Jesus and his disciples celebrated the Passover Seder 24 hours before they should have. And there are good explanations for why. If someone asks in the question, an answer thing, I'll answer why, but it's a little bit of a inside baseball kind of explanation that may not be interesting first time around. But anyway, so Judaism was fulfilled exactly as it was supposed to be fulfilled on Passover with the coming of the Messiah, with the coming of redemption through the real Messiah, through the ultimate Messiah, which took place on the cross, on Good Friday. In fact, a very good argument can be made, and is made by Scott Hahn all the time, that the Passover Seder, which began Holy Thursday at the Last Supper, actually ended with Jesus dying on the cross. And you can go through the sequence of events at the Last Supper, and you can line them up with the sequence of events at the Passover Seder, because the Last Supper, remember, was liturgically a Passover Seder. So there are rubrics to that. There's a formula to follow for that. You can line up what happened at the Last Supper with the formula for a Passover Seder. And you can say, hey, wait a minute, they didn't finish the Passover Seder. They did the first 3 parts of the Seder, but they never did the 4th part of the Seder. And in fact, the 4th part of the Seder concludes with a 4th cup of wine, and the conclusion, it is finished. And Scott Hahn, for one, and many others, think that the reason why the 4th part of the Passover Seder was not celebrated on Holy Thursday night is because that Seder, the Seder which was the real Passover, concluded with Jesus's death on the cross. It began with the beginning of the Seder on Holy Thursday night, and it concluded when Jesus took his last drink of vinegar from the sponge and said, "It is finished," and expired. And Scott Hahn says, when he said it is finished, he is referring to the conclusion of the Passover Seder, the real Passover Seder, which was the Last Supper. Now, I haven't even said this. I'll say this, then maybe I'll go to questions or something. Some of you may know what matzah is, right? It's this unleavened bread. Passover Seder centers on, it doesn't really center on the matzah, but certainly the matzah is a centerpiece of the Passover Seder, because the Jews, it's like a partial fast on Passover, and you can't eat any grain except unleavened bread. When Jesus lifted up the bread at the Last Supper and consecrated it and turned it into his body, that was matzah, which was unleavened, which in fact is why the Eucharist in the Western Church has to be unleavened, right? The wafer is unleavened bread, because in fact, from the very first Catholic Mass, which was the Last Supper, it was unleavened bread. Now, there are many, many mystical parallels between the Passover Seder and the Catholic Mass. And let me just go through a few of them, maybe, while I still have some time, and while I still have a little order here. Okay, first of all, I don't want to be too kind of too I don't want to say too Catholic, but I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings here who may not be Catholic. But participation in the Passover Seder by Jewish law and by Jewish theology is not a commemoration. It is a becoming present at the Exodus from Egypt. It is actually God performing for you what he performed 2,000 years ago when he freed the Jews from slavery in Egypt. And in fact, this is explicit at the Passover Seder. You're failing at celebrating the Seder properly if you think it's a commemoration. You have to participate in the liberation that took place when the Jews were freed in Egypt. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound a little bit like the Mass? And because we know that the Mass is not a commemoration, the Mass actually makes us present at Jesus' sacrifice and makes us recipients of the graces which came at Calvary 2,000 years ago. So this theological understanding of the Passover Seder is in itself a prefigurement of its fulfillment in the Catholic Mass. Similarly, I mentioned early on that a Jew loses his salvation if he doesn't participate in the Passover Seder. I'm not going to say that a Christian loses his salvation if he doesn't participate in the Mass, but Jesus kind of sounded like that, didn't he? In the Bread of Life discourse, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you have no life within you. There's certainly something parallel there. There's a foreshadowing there of the centrality of participating in the Eucharist for receiving the ultimate salvific grace from God. And what else? Oh, this is really cool. Let's say, excuse me. The rabbis were very concerned about what would happen when the Messiah came, because that's the whole point of Judaism. So they asked a lot of interesting questions. One of the questions they asked was, after the Messiah comes, if you read the Old Testament, there are all kinds of sacrifices and offerings. There are wave offerings, there are sin offerings, there's Thanksgiving offerings there, and so forth. And the rabbis asked 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, when the Messiah comes, will the sacrifices cease or will they continue? You know what the answer they had was? All of the sacrifices will cease except for one, the Thanksgiving sacrifice. What's Eucharist? It's the Greek word for Thanksgiving. So they were prophetically correct. They also asked, we're talking about 2,000 years ago, 2,200 years ago, they asked, after the Messiah comes, will manna come down from heaven again? And Midrash Rabbah says the following. That's you can think of it as the Talmud. It's basically Jewish canonical writings that are not Old Testament. Midrash Rabbah says the following, quote, as the first Redeemer caused manna to descend, so will the latter Redeemer cause manna to descend, okay? So basically, Jewish theology said after the Messiah comes, manna will descend from heaven again. The miraculous bread from heaven will descend again, right? Which is, of course, the Eucharist is the real miraculous bread from heaven. Makilta says, that's another one of these canonical Jewish writings from 2,000 years ago, you will not find manna in this age, but you shall find it in the age after the Messiah comes. And then Second Baruch, which is an apocryphal Jewish scriptural writing, says, after the Messiah is revealed, the treasury of manna will come down again from on high, and they will eat of it in those years, because these are they who will have arrived at the consummation of time. That's us. That's us. That's the Eucharist. Okay. I think I will probably, yeah, it's a few minutes before 8. And let me unveil this. I was, okay, so I don't know, boss, but should we, maybe we should move to questions, because I'm sure the questions are going to bring up things that I'm going to want to spend a few minutes on also.
Yes, so we have many questions. Now, some of these also, Roy, looks like some of them might have come in earlier, even before you started your talk. So some of them are going to be mixed in with ones relevant to your talk. I'll try to keep them flowing.
Why don't you start with ones that are really about Last Supper, Passover?
Yeah. Okay, so you're making all these connections, which are really making sense and clear, especially for some of us who are Catholic and know the Old Testament, but never saw some of these connections. Is that something for yourself as a Jew, like when you had your, whether you call it a conversion experience or not, when you had this encounter with the Lord and you came into the Catholic Church, was it over time in your study that you began to see these things, and like, or was kind of like they just started popping up and like you started realizing? Does this make sense?
Yeah, the question makes sense. But I don't remember the answer. It's the problem. I don't really remember. Um, I never thought I converted, as you know. That's why you're a little
Right,
apologetic when you use that term,
right,
because if the Catholic Church is true, and of course it is the continuation of Judaism. And after the coming of the Jewish Messiah, and Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, I never felt like I gave anything up. Um, every word of the Old Testament is considered divinely. I mean, the Old Testament is divinely revealed sacred scripture, right? Just like the
right,
New Testament, in
right,
according to the Catholic Church. There's nothing in the Old Testament that I was supposed to stop believing.
right.
Um, so I was never surprised by anything. And I obviously always knew that the Last Supper was a Passover Seder. I think that some of this was probably obvious to me, just like the air that I breathe, because I mean, I knew about the Passover Seder, I knew about the Last Supper, but some of it, for instance, at Scott, I gave credit to Scott Hahn there. Over time, I've also come across more neat little parallels and stuff.
So this might tie in a little bit with that. What is the Jewish view or belief of our Last Supper? Do they acknowledge that it took place?
You know, Judaism doesn't have a magisterium. So Jews are allowed to believe, I don't want to say anything they want, but a wide range of beliefs. There are Jews that don't think Jesus ever existed. Okay, that he was a fictional character from day one.
Hmm.
So obviously, they're not terribly concerned about the Last Supper. I think that most Jews do think that I don't really know, because again, I said yet last night, before my conversion, I knew nothing about Christianity. I never read the New Testament. I wouldn't dream of reading the New Testament. And you don't find out about the Last Supper at in Christmas carols.
Hmm.
So I don't even remember. I probably heard the phrase "the Last Supper." I
Right.
have no idea of how much I knew about it and whether I thought it was a Passover Seder or not. Now, one of the curious things about Jewish anti-Christian apologetics is that doesn't mean they're anti-Christian. It just means anti-Christianity. It's sort of like pushing away Christianity. Is that there are all these places where the superficial rabbinic response to what it says in the New Testament is, see, the people who wrote the New Testament don't even know legitimately about Judaism, because there are all these mistakes about Judaism in the New Testament. Many of those mistakes about Judaism in the New Testament aren't mistakes at all. They're actually um, they actually deeply significant. So, for instance, I have seen rabbis say whoever wrote the New Testament couldn't have known about Judaism because the Last Supper skips the last part of the Passover Seder,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Which might actually be of tremendous significance because the Seder was only concluded on the cross.
Right.
Um, so another of those criticisms is the New Testament talks about multiple chief priests, and who was chief priest last year, who was living, and who was chief priest this year. I think Ananias was previously chief priest, and Caiaphas was the chief priest this year. That's against Jewish law. They're not allowed to do that. There can only be one chief priest until he dies, sort of like a Supreme Court justice or something, and then the next chief priest that takes his place. But in fact, it was a sign of corruption in the Jewish hierarchy at the time,
Uh,
because there were so many perks associated with being chief priest. The ruling family cycled the chief priesthood among its members so they could all get the perks. Sort of like
geez.
having lifetime Secret Service protection or something. Um, so anyway, So anyway, that's a little bit of an aside, but sometimes the critiques of the New Testament saying this deviates from Judaism, it's actually because it's more accurate than Judaism itself is, so to speak.
Right. No, I don't know it. I think you answered this. Why did they celebrate Passover 24 hours early?
I didn't answer it. I just said I'll wait until somebody asks the
Well,
question.
there you go. Somebody just asked it.
There are a number of possibilities. And I'll tell you the one that I buy into, what I think is the most probable, is every Jewish family was supposed to bring a lamb to be sacrificed on Passover. That is a lot of lambs. That is a lot of lambs. And it's more lambs than could be slaughtered in the temple in a day. So in order to, what was the expression, flatten the curve? Flatten the curve, like the 2 weeks when we were supposed to wear masks. In order to flatten the curve, there was a little geographic separation which was done, and Jews from the Galilee brought their lambs a day early to be sacrificed. And so they would have their Passover Seder actually a night early, because they couldn't sacrifice all the lambs in one day. So they spread it out by region. I think that's eminently plausible. And actually, it's in the visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich. And I actually take her visions pretty seriously. She's she's a blessed. And however, another theory, which there are other theories, including that the Essenes used a slightly different calendar and Passover happened a day earlier on the Essenian calendar, and Jesus's family were Essenes. So there are various possibilities.
So, I'm just reading this as we go down. You state when the Messiah comes. Who is the Messiah in the Jewish faith?
Jesus. No.
There you go. That was easy.
That's easy. You mean, what do Jews expect the Messiah to be?
I think it's along those lines, yes.
Yeah, I think so too. I wrote a book to answer these questions. So these are the better the question, the longer the answer, But basically, the Old Testament has two sets of messianic prophecies. It's got the suffering servant prophecies. We had one today, at least in the traditional Mass, from Isaiah. I think it was from Isaiah.
Yeah, Isaiah.
And it has the victorious king prophecies about the lion lying down with the lamb and the swords being beaten into plowshares and so forth, right? The no more suffering, wipe away every tear and so forth. So there are these two sets of messianic prophecies in the Old Testament that caused unending confusion, which Judaism still suffers from. So basically, the most common view, I suppose, is to look at the victorious Messiah prophecies that we know refer to the second coming, actually. Essentially, the heavenly Jerusalem, the end of suffering, the end of death, and so forth. And to expect that to be what happens when the Messiah comes. That's probably the most common view among Jews who take it really seriously today. However, hasn't always been the case. And Maimonides, who was the most authoritative, wrote the most authoritative, I guess you could say, dogmatic catechism for Judaism, I think he was 12th century, said that no, when the Messiah comes, the transformation he brings about will be purely spiritual and it won't be visible and everything will look the same on the surface. So it looks a lot more like what happened when Jesus came. And of course, from the New Testament, there were especially when Israel was under Roman occupation, there were a lot of Jews who were expecting the Messiah as the son of David to be the victorious, military king that that brings Judaism or the Jewish people back to their sovereignty and their glory. That's not thought. I don't think any Jew expects that kind of a temporal Messiah anymore.
Hmm. This might tie in a little bit to that. Is there a role the Jewish people still need to play out before the coming of Christ?
Amen, brother. Yes, that's why you have to pray for the conversion of the Jews. Yes, because the second coming can't happen until there's a widespread conversion of the Jews. Paragraph 674 of the New Catechism says, quote, "The glorious Messiah's coming is suspended at every moment of history until his recognition by all Israel. Jesus cannot return until there's a conversion of the Jews." I'll repeat that from the Catechism. The glorious Messiah's coming is suspended. It's like he's up there waiting, right, to come back on a cloud. It's suspended at every moment of history until his recognition by all Israel. So that is one role that the Jews still have to play. They have to convert in order for the second coming to happen.
And there are signs that lead up to that. If one were to watch.
Well, yes, you asked that question last night, if I remember correctly. And one of those signs that we see now is Messianic Judaism, or the Jews for Jesus movement, or whatever you want to call it. For instance, there is not a town in Israel without a Messianic Jewish congregation. That's all new. I mean, 50 years ago, there was no such thing. 60 years ago, there was no such thing as Messianic Judaism. That's all new. I think we see a lot of other signs that suggest it might be time for the glorious Messiah to return. We know about the great apostasy dogmatically from the Catechism of the Council of Trent. It says that before the second coming, we know that three things have to happen. The gospel has to be spread throughout the world. The Antichrist has to make an appearance, and the great apostasy, there has to be a widespread falling away from the faith. That's referred to as the great apostasy. And, one could argue that, the signs of the times are suggestive.
Right. Roy, I pray along with your Divine Mercy and Rosary group. In that group, your book, Salvation is from the Jews, has been mentioned. Is what you're explaining tonight given in greater detail in that book? Or is that book more about the Old Testament leading up to Jesus's birth? Thank you. This is fascinating.
A lot is explained in a lot of detail in that book. It's like 380 pages or something. However, I can't say really that this is elaborately explained in that book, what I talked about tonight. I wrote that book, I wrote that book a number of years ago, and I have continued learning. And also, 380 pages was enough. It wasn't enough for me to write down everything. The purpose of that book was to show the role of Judaism in salvation history. What I've been talking about tonight is actually not so much showing the role of Judaism in salvation history as showing the typological foreshadowings in Judaism of the crucifixion and of the Last Supper and so forth. So no, it's not elaborately dealt with there. If anybody wants everything that I know I have about Judaism, I have a 12-part series on my YouTube channel called What is Judaism? That starts with Abraham and goes up to today. And it's like 24 hours because each episode is like 2 hours long. And that's really, and I did it recently. I did it, maybe 6 months ago or something. So that's really where everything that I have to say is in one place.
Wow. And that can be found on your website.
No, it's on
my
my
YouTube. I'm sorry,
channel.
YouTube.
And
Yes,
it's free,
YouTube
by the
channels.
way. All of my media stuff is free.
What do you think of the idea that some have that the temple must be rebuilt? Do you think that will happen? And if so, do you think that the sacrifice of animals would occur once again at the temple?
I think that's Meshuggah, if anyone knows what that means. I think it's crazy. It's a very un-Catholic and even un-Christian view. I don't fault Jews for thinking that, because they don't know what to make of the destruction of the temple, because they can't follow Old Testament Judaism until the temple is rebuilt. But we know from, among other things, the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament, that the Jewish sacramental life was a foreshadowing of actually of the crucifixion. I mean, the animal sacrifice was a foreshadowing of the ultimate sacrifice for once and for all, right? We have a high priest who only had to offer sacrifice once for all time, something like that in the book to letter to the Hebrews.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's absolutely clear that the whole Jewish sacrificial system, and with the temple and everything, was a foreshadowing, was a placeholder, it was a preparation, however you want to look at it, for the real descent of salvation, which happened through Christ.
So here's one, Roy. I was a secular Jew who converted to Catholic faith 26 years ago. I still observe some aspects of Passover, no Seders anymore, by not eating leavened bread. Is that concordant with Catholic teaching? And thanks for an informative and interesting talk. Learned much I didn't know.
Great, and let me say Mazel Tov on entering the Catholic Church, being a post-Messianic Jew. Um, uh, you know, that the view of that, the Catholic teaching about that has changed over time. This is little t teaching. Little t teaching can change. It's just big T teaching that can't change. St. Thomas Aquinas came down very hard on Jews in the Catholic Church continuing any Jewish, kind of prayer practices or liturgical practices. I do continue some Jewish prayer practices. Among other things, I wear a tallis when I pray in my chapel at home, and or a prayer shawl, and stuff like that. And I do celebrate. I actually celebrate Seders all the time in Catholic churches. I think our original arrangement for Our Lady of Perpetual Help might have been a Seder. I'm not sure, but I usually do that during Lent.
Right.
I think that the rule to follow is the rule that St. Paul says. He says, if you fast, fast for the glory of God, and if you feast, feast for the glory of God. If you follow Jewish, if you observe some Jewish rituals, if you don't eat leaven on Passover, as long as you understand that Jesus is the Messiah and the fulfillment of the Jewish law, and you're doing it to give God glory, then I don't see what's wrong with it.
So here's another question, if you want to answer. So why don't the Jews accept Jesus as the Messiah?
I actually got that question last night too. Lots of answers. One answer is Paul's answer in Romans 11, which is, what then? The elect obtained it, but the rest were hardened, as it is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes that should not see and ears that should not hear, down to this very day. Let their eyes be darkened so they cannot see. Lest you be wise in your own conceits, brethren, I want you to understand this mystery. A hardening has come upon part of Israel until the full number of the Gentiles come in, and so all Israel will be saved. So Romans 11 makes clear that it's divine providence, that some significant number of Jews will not enter the church until the full number of the Gentiles come in, and then the Jews will enter the church. That's, by the way, where that statement in the Catechism comes from, that the glorious Messiah's coming is suspended until his recognition by all Israel. That's one reason. Another reason is that most people, including Jews, believe authority, and all of the Jewish authorities explain why Jesus couldn't have been the Messiah, and most people just accept authority. And the third reason, if I can be a little bit controversial, is I mean, really, it takes grace to believe the story of Christianity. There's a lot that's hard to believe there. Should I go through it?
Sure.
Okay, that the Virgin Mary um, uh, was virgin before the birth of Jesus, during the birth of Jesus, and after the birth of Jesus. That's not really, and I mean, if you come from the outside, that's not all that easy to believe. That Jesus was God, that this guy, who runs around and sweats, I don't want to insult Jesus, but whatever, and has to eat and has to do everything the human being does, was actually God himself. That when God became man, the one and only time God became man, it wasn't obvious to everyone around him, and he became man so that he could suffer and die the most horrible death ever. I mean, none of this is intuitively obvious, right? I mean, I think it's asking a lot to expect that somebody who wasn't brought up thinking this stuff was reasonable should later on in life say, oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Of course God did things that way.
Yeah, I mean, didn't Paul have the same problem when he was out talking about the cross of Christ? I'm sorry, 1 second here. Okay, Roy, somebody's asked, what would you say to fallen away cradle Catholics who don't believe in the true presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist?
I would say have a scientific attitude and look at the evidence seriously. Look at the Eucharistic miracles seriously. Um, yeah, just look at the modern Eucharistic miracles seriously. Look at the healings at Lourdes seriously. Don't you don't have to read pious stuff. Read scientific stuff. And again, I have a series on my YouTube channel called Science and Faith, where I go through the scientific evidence for the truths of the Catholic faith. And the Eucharistic miracles are totally inexplicable from a materialist point of view. I mean, and these happened, as I said last night, in our day. 1999, 2007, electron microscopes, full forensic analysis, blood chemistry, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
It's wonderful if you have faith, infused faith, or faith that comes from God. But if you don't have faith that comes from God, at least use your reason to move in the direction of truth.
That's a good point. Did the gospel writers believe they were continuing Judaism or that they were starting a new religion?
They believe,
according to your perspective.
No, their perspective, the question is kind of what their perspective was. And their perspective was that they were continuing Judaism, so much so that the very first crisis in the church that required the very first ecumenical council, what was that crisis? Are we allowed to let Goyim into the church, or is it only for Jews? Remember, it's in Acts 15, I think, the Council of Jerusalem. Are we allowed to let these non-Jews into the church? So yeah, as a matter of fact, Jewish Christians continued with synagogue worship up until, I think it was actually up until about the year 120, but it was at least up until the year 70 or 80. They were going to the synagogue alongside, I mean, not alongside. On Sundays, they would go to Mass, and presumably on Saturdays, they would go to the synagogue. No, I mean, Jesus, look at what Jesus preached, right? Every time he got up and preached in synagogue, he opened the scrolls, right, and read from the scrolls. He was preaching in synagogue as a rabbi. His disciples were around him. The apostles were around him. He was the Jewish Messiah, and this was Judaism as transformed by the Jewish Messiah. And it took a good long time, like until the Council of Jerusalem, to figure out that even though this was transformed Judaism, it's not just for Jews, it's for everybody.
Christians feel we have been waiting so long for the second coming. How have the Jews been so patient for even longer waiting for the Messiah? It
I
is
think it was,
amazing.
yeah.
It is amazing to me how faithful so many Jews have stayed to that hope despite all the all the awful historical injustices they have suffered.
Um, Pope Benedict the 16th wrote, I don't have the quote in front of me, but it's very beautiful. But he said how the Jewish people survived, maintained their identity for over 2,000 years without a nation, without a homeland, is something completely unprecedented in history. All the other peoples in the Old Testament don't exist anymore. And the persistence of the Jews in their identity without a homeland for 2,000 years is clear evidence that they still have a role to play in the unfolding of salvation. And it's clear evidence of divine providence at work.
Mm.
I'm paraphrasing, but so
Yeah.
I agree. And I think that's the answer. I think that it is, I think that God knows what he's doing, and God is choreographing this, and he has somehow, somewhat miraculously, arranged for the persistence of the Jewish people.
Good answer. Okay, I mean, I think this is pretty clear. Are Messianic Jews Christians, or are they Jews expecting of a Messiah who's not Jesus?
Oh no, I understand that. That's because of the
Oh.
phrase. The term is ambiguous, but its usage is Messianic Jews are Jews who believe that Jesus, our Jesus, was the Messiah. That's basically the definition of Messianic Jew. Even though the phrase itself is, as you point out, ambiguous. Now, some of them are not Christian in that they don't consider themselves Christian. Some of them are not Christian in that they think that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, but they don't think he was the Son of God or God himself. Basically, they're all over the map. They can believe anything they want. The only thing they have to believe in order to be Messianic Jews is that, yes, Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah.
How would a Jew who denies the existence of Jesus respond to the historical writings of Josephus,
Josephus, yeah.
the Jewish historian, and Tacitus, the Roman historian?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I don't think it's very honest to deny the historical existence of Jesus. And I don't know what they would say. Maybe they, I have no idea, because it's a good point. But a better point, in a way, is the Talmud talks about Jesus. So how these rabbis get away with saying Jesus never existed, I think they are being, anyway, I don't want to, they may not be entirely honest, because in fact, their references to Jesus in the Talmud.
All right, Roy, I just think we have and some of these are random. These might have been some that were asked before your talk tonight. Why is pork and other food considered unclean?
Ask God. He wrote that in the Old Testament. The Old Testament comes from God. Ask him. Seriously, it's straight from the Old Testament. These are the animals you're allowed to eat. These are the animals you're not allowed to eat. If it's a land animal, it has to have cloven hooves and chew its cud. Pigs have cloven hooves but don't chew their cud, and horses chew their cud but don't have cloven hooves. So horses aren't kosher, pigs aren't kosher. Cows have cloven hooves and chew their cud, so they're kosher. But God doesn't give a reason. I don't like to put words in God's mouth, because I hope to someday see him. I don't want to have to apologize for more than I have to.
Play it safe. All right, I think this could be our last question. Decades ago, some Catholic churches had Seder meals in their church halls before the Holy Thursday Mass. This practice has been discontinued. I'm not sure if it's been discontinued everywhere. Do you know why this happened? I always love seeing the references to Christ in these Seder meals.
I love giving them. I'm trying to be nice, which isn't easy to answer this question and be nice at the same time. Um, uh, Church authorities, bishops and pastors, value good relations with the Jewish community. That's a good thing. Sometimes the Jewish community gets a little bit up in arms when parishes have Seder meals and show how the Passover Seder is really all about Jesus and Judaism is all about Jesus. You can kind of understand why, the rabbis in town are not wildly enthusiastic about that. And so I think that what happens is that the Jewish community complains that to the Catholic community or to the Catholic authorities that they're trespassing on Jewish holy ground, and the Catholic authorities back off.
Well, I'm just trying to make sure I didn't miss anything before we end. Someone asked, what was the beautiful music playing? It was a Gregorian chant, but I don't know exactly what album it's from. So sorry about that. I'll have to look that up. I think that's it, Roy.
Okay.
Boy, I want to thank you on behalf of Our Lady of Perpetual Help and all the other parishes that have, I saw that registered from all over the area for, coming, sharing your story last night, really opening yourself up. And tonight, I think, was excellent in giving us, at least me, a really, like I said, a really broader and richer appreciation for what's happening and what we celebrate this Thursday and Friday, and every day, actually, at the Mass. Seriously. So thank you so much. And again, your website is www.salvationisfromthejews.com. And real quickly before we leave, why that salvation is from the Jews obviously comes from John's Gospel, but you chose that. It seems like it's a theme that runs through a lot of your book. It's the website. It's
the website because it was the book, and I was a nobody before the book was published, and so the book, I don't know how to put it, but my whole ministry kind of sprang out of the book. So I used that title of the book. I titled the book that because I want to bring Jews into the Catholic Church. Really, what I want to do is I want to bring Jews into post-Messianic Judaism, since the Messiah already came. They shouldn't be waiting. It's been a long wait, as somebody pointed out. I figured that salvation is from the Jews, and of course that came from the mouth of Jesus.
Right.
Okay, let me back up. I want Jews to have as much God between birth and death as possible. I want everyone to have as much God between birth and death as possible. There's no way to have nearly as much God between birth and death as there is by participating in the Catholic sacraments and by knowing Catholic teaching. The Jews often have the attitude that Christianity is for them, Judaism is for us. And anyway, the church doesn't really like Jews and discriminates against Jews. And, we have no place there. Salvation is from the Jews. To have Jesus say salvation is from the Jews is to reverse that negative view, or that impression that Jews have that Christianity has a negative view of them. And it turns it around to the true view, which is that salvation is from the Jews. So I wanted to enable Jewish identity, rather than keeping Jews away from the church, to have that Jewish identity draw them into the church.
Makes sense. And we pray that there be more Jews that continue.
Actually, you know what? Because I said that phrase and I have 90 seconds left, let me read a postulatum from the First Vatican Council. That's a prayer for the conversion of the Jews.
Sure.
But it was endorsed by the First Vatican Council. It was heavily endorsed by the Pope of the Council, who was Saint Pope Pius IX, and it was endorsed by virtually all the Council Fathers, signed by all the Council Fathers. And let me just close with this prayer.
Yeah, no,
for the
that's
emerging
exactly. I was going
leaders.
to say that. Why don't you close with that prayer?
The undersigned Fathers of the Council humbly yet urgently pray that the Holy Ecumenical Council of the Vatican come to the aid of the unfortunate nation of Israel with an entirely paternal invitation, that finally exhausted by a wait no less futile than long, the Israelites hasten to recognize the Messiah, our Savior Jesus Christ, truly promised to Abraham and announced by Moses, thereby completing and crowning, not changing, the religion of Moses. The undersigned fathers have the very firm confidence that the Holy Council will have compassion on the Israelites, because they are always very dear to God on account of their fathers, and because it is from them that the Christ was born according to the flesh. Would that they then speedily acclaim the Christ, saying, Hosanna to the Son of David, blessed be he who comes in the name of the Lord. Would that they hurl themselves into the arms of the Immaculate Virgin Mary, even now their sister according to the flesh, who wishes likewise to be their mother according to grace, as she is ours. Amen.
Amen. Beautiful prayer. All right. Good night, everyone. And Roy, good night. And thanks
Good night.
again.
Thanks for the invite. Good night, everyone.